welcome to the Libertarian Listener with me, Chris Wilkinson. In this week's episode, we have Mike Swadling of the Croydon Constitutionalists organisation to talk about the podcast, as well as his political experience and focuses. And then we'll be getting on to this week's political news stories, notably the lockdown rebellion happening in Manchester and northern regions, the Covert Human Intelligence Services bill that is passing through Parliament, as well as politics in New Zealand, what with Jacinda Ardern's Labour landslide. Okay, Mike, so who are the Croydon Constitutionalists and what is the aim of the group?
Yeah, so we set up a couple of years ago. Purpose of it is to be a non-partisan group promoting classical liberal ideas. Now, don't ask me to define what classical liberal is too much. I think probably everyone has a bit of their own definition. And I wouldn't want to get too hung up on it, but you've got to have a label. You've got to have a thing that people can say about you. We put it as Brexit, pro-low taxes, pro-free speech, free markets, and rational science. I think we have concerns about the response to man-made global warming, indeed if it is even man-made. We set ourselves up really as just a little group that grew out of the Brexit Vote Leave team here in Croydon. And we thought, you know what, we like campaigning on issues more than we like campaigning for parties. And I thought, well, actually, let's try and broaden that base, because the referendum was, of course, a cross-party base, and say, look, let's campaign on those issues and try and bring that out in our borough and get some events organised.
So does it have any regular events or activities going on at the moment?
Well, at the moment, not so much. I mean, we were part of the Leave of Britain group that Lucy Harris, who became a Brexit Party and then Conservative Party MEP, set up. We were the Leavers of Croydon, and we are, in fact, the Leavers of Croydon. And we used to have regular drinks through that, which was a way of staying in touch with friends and pushing the Brexit conversation. We've set up various events with the Taxpayers Alliance, street stalls, meetings, and what have you. And we've had a few events. So a sort of friend of ours, David Kurten, who's now running for Mayor of London, has spoken at a couple of our events. We've had a My Tuppence Worth event where we allowed just anyone who registered to come along and speak for 5 minutes about anything they wanted to. Right now, our next event is on the future of the BBC. So we've got local councillor Jeet Bains, who had run for Parliament for the Conservatives, Harry Fone of the Taxpayers Alliance, who many of you will know, and someone else who many of you know, Sofia Svihurova, and apologies to Sofia for butchering your name there, who used to be the group leader in Brighton for the Libertarian Party. They're going to be on a Zoom event talking about what they think is the future for the BBC. Bit of a panel discussion, and then a chance for and then open it up as a normal kind of Zoom meeting and give everyone a chance to get involved and have a conversation. So that's on Friday, the 6th of November. Have a look at our website for details.
I'll probably put a link down in the description below for anyone who wants to get involved with that.
Fantastic.
Where can people access the Croydon Constitutionalist podcast?
Advertising your arrivals, although we did that, obviously. And the serious point here, I think it's really important groups like ours work together at the moment. We are all looking for the same ends, and that's great. So we're on everything. You can ask Amazon Music to find it. I won't say what particular product you can ask, because it will start speaking to me from the side if I do. We're on iTunes. We're on YouTube, Spotify, Stitcher, a whole host of podcasting platforms. And our easiest way is coming via our website or look at us on social media, and you'll see a link somewhere pretty quickly to our latest podcast. Of course, our last podcast was with your good self, so thanks again for doing that. And if everyone wants to know a bit more about Chris, then listen in.
So for those who don't know, what role have you played in previous polls in the UK? So I take it you're obviously part of the EU Referendum campaign. Have you been involved in any elections or anything like that?
I have. So in 2017, I stood for UKIP in Croydon North, so I was a member of UKIP going into the referendum. Joined it for a couple of reasons. Obviously, wanted to leave the EU, but it's surprising to people that don't know this sort of politics, was because it looked like it was the most libertarian or liberal, classical liberal party at the time in the mainstream. I ended up then running what was a group of us wanted to start campaigning to leave the EU in a non-partisan way. That then became the Leave.EU campaign. So if anyone remembers the history of the referendum, That Leave.EU campaign became part of the Grassroots Out campaign. And then Grassroots Out lost the official designation to Vote Leave. And in Croydon, we'd already set up a campaign team as part of Grassroots Out. I was running it. Dan Heaton, the fellow member of the Croydon Constitutionalists, I probably should have mentioned earlier. Chris Mendes, who many of you will know in the leader of the Foundation Party, was in another part of Croydon. So we split Croydon in three, and we didn't have anyone in Croydon North. And we were trying to sort of build up our team and get folks. We had a lot of volunteers at the time. We were starting to put on street stalls and what have you. Vote Leave won. So we got in touch with the Vote Leave team in Croydon. The Vote Leave team turned out basically to be pretty much one guy and his friends. He was based in the north of Croydon. Duncan's been fantastic helping us out since then. We kind of merged the two together and became this kind of cross-party EU referendum group campaign to leave the EU, which worked fantastically for me. It meant I had different people supplying leaflets. Some people didn't like the Vote Leave stuff, so you could do the Leave.EU. Some didn't like the Arron Banks kind of style, so you could give them something from the Better Off Out campaign. You know, you just work together to try and get as many votes as possible. When that finished, back in UKIP days, of course, we had the 2017 election, and I stood in Croydon North for UKIP, and I've subsequently stood a couple of times for council for UKIP in Croydon. Then the mass exodus happened to UKIP. Yeah, UKIP went down a rabbit hole. It should never have got involved in some of the people it did. We left, and it's been quite liberating to be able to work with a whole host of parties, like the Foundation Party, like the Libertarian Party, UK Liberty, the SDP, Christian People's Alliance, Conservatives, you know, a whole host of people, and say, look, you know, we've all got these kind of similar ideas. How can we push them forward? And yeah, that's what we've been doing for the last couple of years.
Right. So the first major topic of today's interview is the lockdown rebellion. I've got a quote from Manchester Evening News here that says, Sir Keir told ITV Granada reports that politicians in the region of Manchester and the North are fighting back against restrictions they believe are flawed and unfair. He added, Andy Burnham is quite right to stick up for his community and say it's not good enough to impose restrictions on us and not give us the economic support that is necessary to go with them. Mr Johnson stressed he will intervene if an agreement is not reached on Tier 3 restrictions. So is Andy Burnham and other political representatives in the north of England doing the right thing to stand against the government's lockdown policies?
Yeah, yes. He's the elected representative of the people of Manchester. He's probably not someone I'd have ever voted for, but his job is to stand up for the people he represents. That's the purpose of a metro mayor, a powerful figure like that. So I think that's absolutely the positive thing he's doing. Now, is he doing it because he actually just wants to broker more cash for the city and for the council rather than necessarily for the people? Yeah, maybe so. I mean, I'm not gonna try and read his intentions, but he's there to stand up for people. That's exactly what he should be doing. These lockdowns aren't working. They're not making the difference that you expect them to make. If lockdowns were working, you wouldn't need to keep ratcheting them up and saying, look, we need something to help us here. If you're doing that, it makes some sense. I live on the border of London. I do think there's a problem with local lockdowns. With a good arm, you could throw into Surrey from where I am. But obviously I'm under a different set of rules to the people, just down the street from me. That doesn't really work. We're not really used to that in this country. And if you're in Manchester and you're worried about the impact on your region, but the town next door has got a completely different set of rules, that will see people moving businesses there, people maybe cross-contaminating between the two. You don't have a standard kind of set of model for that. It doesn't work. And good on him. That we do need someone to be in opposition to this government.
So I've got a quote here from iNews, which says, a number 10 source said the government wanted to work out something together with local leaders, as we have done with Liverpool and Lancashire. But the source warned Mr Burnham must put an end to the posturing and insisted that the government would move if we need to and force Greater Manchester into the highest risk category if a deal cannot be found. The first thing that strikes me about that is how odd it is to try and force a region into a higher risk category. Doesn't that really prove that this is more political than scientific? And can we really trust the government's doing the right thing for the people there? And also as well, should we as individuals be doing more to stand against social distancing and promoting the lifting of lockdown and liberty over tyranny?
I think there's a few bits you can look at in this. The first thing is, he is right, of course. The government have the jurisdiction over health issues, not the local mayor. As much as I think he's right, Andy Burnham's right to push back and other local mayors are right to push back, it is a government purview and they can enforce it if they think it's the right thing to do. I think there's a real risk when you elect someone for one purpose. Sadiq Khan here in London, so I'm in London. The people of London elected him to look after our police and our transport, and he thinks we elected him to be a foreign policy expert on Brexit. Now, we didn't. That wasn't what he's elected for. He should actually stick to what his job is. And you know, that's not to say he shouldn't stand up for London in the same way that Andy Burnham's doing in Manchester. But there is a certain point that the government's in control. I'm entirely comfortable with that thought. Is it political? Yeah. I mean, you're either at risk. There's either some benefit to this lockdown. There's either a ratio you look at that says, hang on, we need to tip you over into this different model of control, or there isn't. It isn't a thing of saying, well, if you say nice things about us in the press, then we'll tip you over, or we won't tip you over. But if you say bad things, well, you know, we're not going to give you the money, or that can't be right. That cannot be a way to run a response to a public health issue. You talked about lifting lockdowns and tyranny. I mean, this is where it comes down to me. I've seen no evidence that anything the government's done has made any difference to the number of deaths we've had. I don't pretend to know how this virus spreads or what it is, but we look at the counterfactual evidence of a country like Sweden, which has lower case rates now, it has lower death rates than we've had. We look at other ways of doing it. A lot of the Far East, now they have different levels of compliance, perhaps they have a different way of living generally, but they've focused on clusters and they focused on looking at particular travel patterns or where there's been problems, and that, you know, they've used those models. The only thing I do know that we've done that's made a difference to the outbreak is sending patients, elderly patients with COVID, home from the hospitals at the start of this. That, you know, meant it went through all of the care homes so badly. In terms of pushing back, you know, I've got my pitchfork, I'm ready. Yes and no. Yes, I do think we should push back. I do think we have to start to take a view that some of the things they're suggesting, I'm just not prepared to do. I now in a situation where I'm not, for as long as London's in tier 2, I cannot see anyone indoors until that comes out. So when's that going to be? Christmas, New Year, end of winter, spring? I don't know. They want my taxes, but they're not prepared to let me see anyone physically for however long that may be. That's unacceptable. I'm not doing that. The flip side of that is, I don't want to be the person that shouts at the bus driver or shouts at the checkout person in the supermarket about not wearing a mask. If you find yourself shouting at the checkout girl about Magna Carta, you've done something wrong. You know, you need to sometimes just put on the mask. Yeah. And I know other people might differ on that view, but sometimes you've got to just live your own life and do practical things and realise, have a go at the right people. I am seeing already, since changes came in here, and obviously I don't know about other parts of the country, but since the changes came in here at the weekend, I have, you know, just wandering round, seeing that people are not following the latest set of changes. Good. I hope we continue not to follow them. I hope people write to their MPs and make a point to say, you know, you've told this person they need to live on their own. This person can't see their boyfriend, girlfriend. You know, it's younger kids. There's adults who can't see enough, don't necessarily need carers, but can't see, you know, much of their family. We need them to put pressure on the MPs and say how appalling that is. There's businesses going out and the impact that's having. And we just need to ignore the rules when they're plain stupid. There's more of us than them, and this will break in our favour.
Are you quite surprised that it's been announced that Wales is going to go into a lockdown at the end of this week, considering that the average death rates now are no different to any other year?
Yes. Yes.
It doesn't make any sense at all, does it?
It's not about health, it's about control. Had the government shut us down for 3 weeks to save the NHS, as they said, and that became 6 weeks because, you know, Boris was ill, there was a lot going on. I think at that point, had they said, right, we've done that, we've had the peak, we're going to start opening up in a controlled manner, we're going to open up, but pretty quickly, and all through the summer, we've stayed pretty open, we've got the schools back, we've gone back to a normal way of living as quickly as possible, And then they come round to us in September and go, winter is coming. We see the cases are going up again. We want to start imposing a few more restrictions just because we're nervous. I think most right-minded people, you might not agree with them fully, you might not agree it's quite the right approach, but most right-minded people would say, well, on the balance, maybe I'll take that. But they haven't. They've got more and more restrictive. They've found more and more ways to control us. And we've seen the double standard. If you're protesting about the right cause, you're fine. You're protesting about the wrong cause, the riot police are in. They really are, I don't know, just trying to hurt the way we live our normal lives. And I think there is still a sense that there's a lot of people in government, and I mean that in the widest sense, the civil service, the quangos, as well as some of the MPs and politicians, who don't really like us. They didn't like us over Brexit. They don't really agree with the way we vote about things. They don't really like us, the way we live our lives, that we go down the pub or, we go to the wrong sorts of restaurants, and they feel this is a great opportunity to set us straight and change us. Well, we absolutely need to resist that. We absolutely need to resist these people. And they've got no credibility. When they come back with us now, and as you say, with the lockdown in Wales, there's no credibility. The purpose of this is surely to save lives and save health. We know we're destroying health. We know we're destroying lives. We know we're destroying wealth. But if death rates are what they normally are, what's all this about then?
Right, so the next topic is on Covert Human Intelligence Services Criminal Conduct Bill. And considering Amnesty International has raised concerns over this bill, which passed through the House of Commons on its third reading by 313 votes to 98, and a similar bill legalising war crimes by UK troops has been shuffled through the Parliament, how concerned should we be that several state institutions, including the Secret Service, will be able to potentially get away with murder, torture and rape whilst being given total legal immunity?
I'm naturally someone who's minded to have some support for what this is promoted as by the government, which is actually a tidying up of existing rules. There are rules that allow people to break the law whilst conducting criminal investigations, and that's not unreasonable. You do need some leeway. And it's tightening them up. So I have a certain amount. Clearly, no one's going to say, yes, isn't it fantastic that legal immunity on sort of rape, torture, and anything else like that? That would be appalling. But some lower level stuff, then I think we kind of accept that might be the case. I've already touched upon, there's quite a lot of political policing, I think, at the moment. I don't particularly trust our police to be an honest broker. I don't think they sit in a neutral position politically. Our government is a government that's just locked us down for so many months in one way or another. It's destroyed huge numbers of businesses. It has prioritised this virus over cancer, over influenza, over heart attacks, a whole load of other diseases and conditions that kill people in greater numbers. I don't feel that I trust this government to act in the best interests of its people. The opposition's no better. They want them to go further and faster. So I don't trust anyone in a position that's in government now or likely to be in government soon, or whenever, to act with integrity on this. So yeah, normally I wouldn't necessarily be that worried. And then 2020 came around, and I think that probably changed everything for me on that front.
So with presumably right-wing government ministers towing Boris's socialist line, such as Jacob Rees-Mogg, who said recently, a disease that is communicated by people meeting is bound to be reduced in its circulation if people meet less. And we saw that with the first lockdown, the emphasis on the word first there because of what's happened earlier today with the announcement of Wales going into lockdown. And Priti Patel saying that only the Conservatives will guarantee our security services the power and support they need to keep the country safe as part of a justification for this Covert Human Intelligence Services Bill. Is there any real hope of the Conservatives moving away from the leftism that it's adopted so long as Boris is still the Prime Minister?
Just taking it back a step, Jacob Rees-Mogg, someone who I had huge admiration for, really enjoyed listening to for a long time. He's happy that we don't meet people as much. He's saying that that's a really good thing. Is this the same Jacob Rees-Mogg that wants people back in Parliament? Jake Rees Mogg is a very wealthy man, and he's come from a good background, but he has made a lot of money, and I don't begrudge him a penny of that. But of course, he doesn't have a business that relies on meeting people. He gets out and meets people because he does that in his job, and he can go into Parliament and he gets interviewed and he can travel around the country. He doesn't need to make an income, so he's not worried whether he can't meet anyone from that perspective. I don't really take seriously anything that a government minister says on whether we get to meet people and the impact that has on us mentally, socially, financially, because these people are not in the position that the rest of us are. This is disingenuous at the best, frankly out of touch and illiberal and selfish at the worst. Priti Patel and hope of the Conservatives not being so left-wing. Look, we always knew that Boris's appeal and part of what won him the last election was he married economic left-wing policies with more social right-wing policies. It was kind of the general view. He was a bit more libertarian in lots of things he was saying and doing, and people thought he would be a bit more pro-free speech. Obviously, he was going to deliver Brexit, but he was going to spend more money on the NHS and look to level up the North. But married, to be fair, married with free ports. So, that would, you'll build the motorway to the free port in the area of the country that you want to level up. That's how he won election. How has he acted in government? Well, I see none of the libertarianism. I see none of the free ports. Where are they? I don't see them. When they locked us down physically, they could have opened up free speech. They could have said, look, we believe for the reason of the pandemic, we have to control some physical movement, but we're going to open up some other things because we don't want to bring the crushing burden of government on you.
Yeah.
They haven't done that. We've seen that, if anything, the actions of the police are completely against that. So left-wing, Marxist, fascist, call it what you want. This government is not conservative in any way. It's not democratic, frankly, in any way in the way it's acting. And it's completely illiberal to the way it acts to the British people.
So the last section of today's interview is on Jacinda Ardern's New Zealand election victory. So do you see Labour's landslide as a sign of New Zealand increasingly moving towards China's sphere of influence over the next few years, as Sky News Australia put it? And what implications could this have for geopolitics and the future? I mean, we've got talk now of Kansas trade deals being done. What are your thoughts on this?
You can easily overinterpret one election. This too shall pass is often the way, having lived through landslide, Conservative, Labour elections, through coalitions, these things are impossible. I won't pretend to be an expert on New Zealand politics, but I did look up and note that this was their third ever best result for Labour. So, it's their third ever best result. It's not their best result. It's not as much of a landslide as perhaps you might think. Classical Liberal Party, ACT, have done rather well and picked up a number of seats. New Zealand First, who were in coalition with Labour, in a minority coalition, have lost a number of seats. You wonder how those vote patterns changing have affected what's happening. Now, I sense that this particular Prime Minister's fairly left-wing as Labour go, but they were in a coalition with New Zealand First, who are a socially conservative party. So, if you're a New Zealander, do you perceive her to be left-wing when she actually closed down the ports? They put a lot of focus on controlling people coming in and out of the country. They were in coalition with a socially conservative party, possibly slightly more right-wing. And we've seen these big changes in who people voted for generally. So I wonder how, be careful of, I think, over-interpreting it would be my first thought. In terms of, future trade deals, clearly, it's a natural thing for us to want to trade more with our former Commonwealth partners. We used to trade hugely with New Zealand and other places prior to joining the EU. I think we still trade in a big way with them now, but I think that will grow as a percentage of our foreign trade, which makes perfect sense. China's real. China's a factor. It's going to have a massive factor everywhere, every country in the world, particularly in that region. New Zealand are going to get close to them, but if they're smart, they'll be looking to balance that off with selling lamb to the Brits and anything else to anywhere else they can, because why wouldn't you? Why wouldn't you want as much trade as possible? And why wouldn't you want as great a diversity of trade as possible? Whether the government's open to it, I don't know. But in terms of getting close to China, we should actually, if they've got sense, they'll be trying to balance that by getting closer to us as well.
I suppose, is it perhaps unfair to credit the New Zealand government with its handling of the coronavirus, considering that their system of lockdowns and social distancing has to be assessed against the relatively small size of the country and its geographical location? And if so, do you think that the global orthodox strategy of tackling the virus has been wrongly vindicated, and perhaps New Zealanders may have made the wrong decision at the ballot box?
There's a tricky thing here. If you get the blame when something goes wrong when you're in government, you've got to get the credit as well when something goes right. So, there has, and people are naturally going to give that blame and credit. That's maybe it's not always fair, but hey, life isn't. From what I understand of the New Zealand actions, though, and maybe not what I think are necessarily always correct, but as already touched upon, they closed the ports of entry, one of the strictest encirclings of their country in the world. Now, I don't know when they open up again whether that might not prove to be a problem for them. That they've not let the virus go through go around the population and build up a certain amount of immunity. But that's not something we've done in this country. I was looking up earlier. We still have apparently the 5th most powerful navy in the world, yet we can't stop a dinghy coming across from France. So something New Zealand government's done, our government's definitely not done. Although if they're following that model, they're not. They're absolutely not. They closed the ports of entry. New Zealand's done a huge number of tests for their size of population. They've done that quicker than most other countries, from what I can see. They've been much more focused on tackling clusters, and they've been much more localised in their response from the start. So when you add those things up, what might superficially look like the similar response that other countries have followed, is it really? Is it actually that similar? And I do wonder if there's not a natural immunity to COVID being built up in the New Zealand population, and maybe we get a vaccine. I don't think we have a vaccine for any other coronavirus, but maybe for some reason this one will be different. But if it isn't, will this start to hurt them in the longer term? I don't know. I don't think you can take away from them success. They've had it in what they've done, but I don't know that we can say we follow the same model.
Right, well, it's been an absolute pleasure speaking with you, Michael.
Pleasure's been mine. Thank you.
Okay, and now we're going to be handing over to Ed, who's going to be talking about the parallels between European leaders usurping the mechanisms of democracy in pursuit of increasing authoritarianism.
Hello there, and welcome to 5 Minutes of Ed for the Libertarian listener. We've seen in the past how all too easy it is those with tyrannical ambitions to use a crisis as a method of usurping the checks and balances of government in order to centralise power in their own lap. Examples range from ancient Rome through the Middle Ages to the present day. In Germany there was widespread social unrest, hyperinflation and mass unemployment to contend with when a young Austrian painter seized his opportunity on the reins of power, with the fire at the Reichstag being the final excuse to implement a new law suspending everything from free speech to habeas corpus. In Chile, General Pinochet used the assassination of Edmundo Perez Žužović to seize the reins in Santiago, later staging a coup leading to a brutal military junta. But this was all in the past, and it wasn't supposed to happen here in Europe. The world dared to assume that after coming into the fold of Western European liberal democracies, the former Soviet satellites of the Eastern Bloc would just move towards a more laissez-faire outlook, with their position in the EU cementing that. Surely it would be impossible to backslide into the realms of authoritarian despotism from which they had escaped a mere quarter-century ago. Well, some have done better than others is one way to put it. The Ukraine has been locked in a brutal political and military struggle for the best part of a decade, with Russia attempting to destabilise what they essentially consider the newly independent backyard, with the odd invasion here and the odd poisoning there and so on. Belarus has always provided a useful template also, with its hockey-obsessed strongman president often being called the last dictator in Europe. But have any other states been moving in a direction which those of us who value individual liberties find manifestly undesirable? Whilst some of the former Warsaw Pact members have done extremely well to maintain their freedoms, especially in the Czech Republic, with its broad protections on free speech, low taxes, open borders, gun rights and property being the envy for the small liberty-loving community here in the UK, Others have not done so well. Viktor Orban in Hungary started his present decade-long term as the leader of the Fidesz party and Prime Minister in 2010. Fidesz is a nationalistic conservative party with a strong anti-immigration platform, somewhat Eurosceptic and most definitely populist. A return to traditional Hungarian values, but with quite a noted liberal economic policy. Listening there, Boris? Our man in the completely natural blonde toupee seems to have embraced these values too. I'm glad that our folks in Westminster take the same line. Viktor Orban is often said to have rejected the traditional liberal idea that society is a free association of atomistic individuals, and that the state is indeed the correct means of guiding society through the turmoils and troubles of this world. I shall pause here to allow Mr. Johnson to catch up on writing his notes. Now you see, in the constitutional reforms of 2011, Orban centralised his own power, especially with regard to judicial review of laws, and made it possible for himself to prorogue... Sorry, I do apologise, it's only dictatorial when someone that's not Boris does it. To suspend democratic oversight. Now you see, in the age of coronavirus that we are, Viktor Orban has been widely denounced as being the, quote, first dictator in the EU, especially since the emergency powers that he has obtained since March. In the Hungarian draft laws on protecting against coronavirus, he can create new legislation without parliamentary approval, extend existing legislation, and punish those breaking self-isolation with a fine, and then jail if it's not paid. All things which Mr. Johnson has done using the emergency powers granted and invoked during the pandemic. Here's the difference. In the same breath, British newspapers have called Orban a despot but Boris brave. They said it's a dereliction of civil liberties for this to be forced upon Hungarians, and yet when done for our supposed benefit, it's just the right thing to do. The average Brit who knows about the nefarious activities of these Eastern Bloc dictators balk at how undemocratic and unfree their countries are, and yet more than 2/3 of Brits now want another full lockdown. We are a nation of paradoxes. 60% of us identify as religious, but significantly more than that want the government to implement measures that would actually bar churches from opening. We sneer at tyrants abroad, but call for the strictest and most authoritarian measures in our own country. Something must be done is the rallying cry for any self-respecting British politician to his baying crowd in response to even the tiniest of incidents, and yet we claim to be a part of the free world. This country has never been free, and if we're not careful, we never will be.
And that's all we have time for on this week's edition of the Libertarian Listener. I hope you enjoyed it, and we'll be back with more again this time next week. Don't forget to check us out on social media, the links to which are in the description below, and I'll see you next time. Thanks for listening.